it has actually happened more often than not. So why we're involving the public in our processes now is really because there's been a paradigm shift. Where it was once more of a show and tell model, here we've created this thing, you go to the public, what do you think of it, what are your comments? That's no longer kind of the system that we're operating in. Now there is an expectation by the public and also by councils, by our governments, that there's more public involvement. And that's not just for projects where there's a regulation that you need to involve the public, but even for processes that don't actually have a regulatory piece for the public, there's just this expectation, especially councils. They want to know, have you engaged the public and what have they actually had to say on a project? Oh, that's okay. So the paradigm shift. And so I'm going to give you tonight 4 tips. I know counting things out is really kind of effective, so 4 tips to take away with you this evening. The first one is to engage early. The second one is to know your audience. And the third, to be transparent. And then finally, to keep it simple. So these should be 4 strategies for effective public participation. So engaging early. What engaging early is not is when your crews are on the ground and they're just about to break ground is not a good time to engage the public. Clearly, a lot of decisions have been made already. Optically, it looks like a lot of decisions have been made, and a lot of decisions have been made. Also, engaging early is not when you have this beautiful rendering of the building that you're going to develop. Then you're not going out to the public and saying, we've developed this beautiful building, what do you think? Because also, clearly a lot of decisions have been made. And really, the trick with the public involvement is engaging before those decisions have been made. And so as early on in the process as possible. And if you're hiring consultants or contractors, for example, even before those people come on board. And in doing that, you're able to, in your schedules and in your budgets, and I know this is particularly important for people in the architecture and engineering industry when you're working under the project management holy trinity of time, scope, and the other piece that I'm blanking on right now, but that you don't have a lot of wiggle room, and money, the third part, you don't have a lot of wiggle room, so you want to be able to plan for these pieces up front. The second one is to know your audience. So we talk about public as though it's one giant entity, but of course it's not. The public has many different people that are a part of that, many different groups, and they all engage in different ways. You communicate with them in different ways. And for example, you're working in a community and it can change block by block, never mind community and city by city. And so when you're going into a project, to identify those different publics up front is really important. You might have local businesses versus big chain stores. You might have more of a seniors community, never mind there could be language differences. And in identifying those different publics, you're also able to identify the best ways of contacting and communicating with them. And an example in where we work and some of the projects we work on, for example, just recently we were planning for a pump station, and that's not probably going to bring people out at 6 o'clock on the evening to plan for a pump station that's nowhere near their houses. So we held the requisite public meeting because that was required, and I think a total of 6 people showed up, and that wasn't not expected. I think 2 people weren't even there for that project. And but what was effective is that we went, and this was in the US, there was a river festival that was taking place. And so of course that's where people are going, not because of our pump station, but because there's families in the community and they're going out to the river festival. So we set up a booth, and of course we were able to get over 100, 150 people engaging in the project. So that's kind of knowing your audience and being able to engage with them in places that make sense. Being transparent, this is really key. So when you get to the end of the project and you have that decision, you'll get that buy-in and that support if you've taken the public along on that journey with you through that decision-making process. So up front in your project, when you're planning early, and you can sit down with your project team and establish what the key decision points are. So what is on the table for discussion and what is off the table for discussion. So if your location of your project has been decided already, that's okay. You just need to be upfront with the public that that's what's been decided and provide a really good rationale for why that's been decided. And then decide the points where they can actually have input and decisions can be made and changed. And it's helpful then to be transparent on when you're making these decisions, the criteria that you're basing these decisions on. So this is an example again of a project where in this case the location was up for discussion, and that was kind of the key input point. And so developed a series of criteria that looked at what we were taking into consideration when deciding the location. So of course there's a money aspect or a cost aspect. There's an environmental aspect, there could be a community impacts aspect. So all of these different criteria, it's also helpful to get the community to input into this criteria so they can develop that also. Sorry?
Do you want me to add something to that?
Sure, if you want.
I was just going to say, I thought this was quite interesting, and I was just going to add something to this. In many projects I'm working on right now, one in Richmond, where they're having an open house to talk about the impacts of school closure. And what they're actually asking the public that's coming to the open house, they're informing them about some of the issues, and then the input that they're getting, and the whole purpose of the open house is to define the criteria by which the trustees will make the decision moving forward. And so they're going to gather that information, find that criteria, and then as they actually have the workshops and they start working through the different issues with the schools, they're going to use the actual criteria developed by the public to make the decision so it aligns with their values.
Yeah, that's a really good illustration. And of course all of this leads to, so when you have the end decision, the end product, and we're not necessarily saying that the public would make the final decision, that rarely happens. And it often doesn't even make sense for that to happen, but they've understood what the trade-offs and benefits are that you've been looking at along the way, and they've been part of that conversation. So that's part of building that public trust. And then finally is keeping it simple. And so we have our jargon, every industry has our jargon, and we don't even know sometimes what we're talking about when we're using that jargon, to be totally honest. And so the public definitely is not understanding that jargon. So to keep it as simple as possible, you always hear these new stats on how long people actually spend reading things, and the latest one I heard was that it's maximum 15 seconds looking at a website, so they're not reading a lot of text. So to keep it as visual as possible, engaging, and keep it really simple. And I find a really good test for this is to send it to your mom. Like, send that piece that you've been working on to your mom or your friend who's not in your industry and ask them, like, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, what does this do for you? Does this make you want to come out to something? Maybe not every item, like we deal with a lot of items, but every once in a while, just as a bit of a check on how you're doing with the communication. Or your grandmother. Be like, what are you doing? Yeah, exactly. So just to go over that again, the tips or the takeaways here are to engage early, and that really takes care of some of those project scoping and budget issues. If you can put that in your contracts up front, that whole process, planning for that iterative process and getting input from the stakeholders, to know your audience, because they are many different people that need to be communicated with in different ways, to be transparent, to bring them along on this process so they understand what the outcome is, and of course to keep it simple so it's understandable. And that's the primer. I'm now going to turn it over to our panelists who can give you some really practical examples of it in their work.
So we're going to invite the panelists, and I think there's two panelists actually. Unfortunately somebody couldn't make it for the third, so we're going to invite our two panelists up. And if you're wondering about the microphone, as I mentioned, IAP2 BC has members all across British Columbia. And one of the things that we've been doing with this series is we've been recording it because some of our members are in remote places like the Yukon, but they're also up in places like Castlegar and Vernon, and they all want to come to these things and learn from their colleagues. So because they can't, and it's very expensive for people to travel, we've tried as a kind of a low-cost venture to record these sessions and then put the slides on our website in little YouTube videos, and believe me, they're not professional. But it's great because people are able to actually listen in and watch, and we've had really great feedback from people in small towns who are our members who say, that's fantastic, we get to listen to some leading Vancouver people and on Vancouver Island who we would never get a chance to hear what's happening in our profession, and we've taken those tips into our towns. And people all over the province and up north have been inspired by the work they've heard here. So that's the reason for this microphone. So it's actually not, when we had Mayor Lisa Helps at our last session in Victoria, she said, this doesn't seem to be working, I'm not projecting. It's not for that, so I just put it out there. And I think, are you going to introduce the speakers, or do you want me to?
Go for it.
I can? Okay. So I'm going to start over here with Paul. I'm just going to read their bios. So Paul is a registered professional engineer with 29 years experience in municipal engineering. Paul has spent the last 27 years working for Metro Vancouver, constructing water and sewer mains and pump stations to supply the region with safe and affordable drinking water and sewage disposal. He's currently the division manager, collection system engineering, supervising a team of 27 design engineers. Projects concluded by the group tend to be a multi-million-dollar, large scale, as these are projects that serve the entire region of 2.5 million people. Generally, the larger the project, the more impact on the community. Therefore, having an effective community engagement strategy to get the affected residents on side is key to project success. So please join me in welcoming Paul. And I'm so pleased that we also have Ray over here. Ray is Stantec's BC Education Sector Lead and has 17 years experience in the architecture field. Some of Ray's recent projects include thoughtful renovations of existing educational facilities to designing brand new buildings. His involvement in the Thompson Rivers University Students' Union renovation won a 2010 Special Jury Award for Architecture and created a vibrant gathering place that provided identity, autonomy, and diversity for the students. A project architect on the recently completed $32 million renovation for the University of the Fraser Valley, Ray Wolf has transformed 5 Department of National Defense buildings into the new Chilliwack campus. Ray finds the challenge of designing extraordinary student-centered spaces particularly rewarding and brings this focus to all of his projects, whether working for a student union or designing state-of-the-art campuses. And Ray sees the process of building design as being collaborative, transparent, integrated, and constantly evolving from project to project. He brings energy and enthusiasm to the design process and believes that listening and clearly understanding the design problem creates a strong point of departure for creative and artistic solutions. Please join me in welcoming Ray. And I'm so pleased that we also have Ray. James. That's going to make it hard for me to see, but okay. So, James Chang is a Canadian architect recognized for his pioneering contributions to West Coast architecture and city building. Born in Hong Kong and educated in North America, Chang's approach represents a sensitive marriage of generous open environments with vibrant high-density living. He's a lecturer at the University of British Columbia and a design critic and juror. Chang launched his architectural career working for Fred Bassetti and Mithun Partners while earning his Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Washington in Seattle. A condominium project he designed during this time captured the attention of the architectural record magazine Young Architects 1972 and Record House 1974 and garnered awards for AIA Seattle as well as the National AIA Homes for Better Living program. Chang went on to apprentice with Henrik Bull in San Francisco and then for 3 years with Arthur Erickson in Vancouver before studying at the Harvard Graduate School of Design under Richard Meyer. Chang established James Chang Architects in 1978 after winning a collaborative entry with Ramoses Kwan and Associates to build the Chinese Cultural Center in Vancouver. Since its inception, the firm has been presently focused on designing high-density urban environments around nuanced open spaces that foster social interchange. Chang plays a leading role in the widely studied and emulated form of urban development known as Vancouverism. The firm continues to evolve concepts of livability and sustainability at various scales, most recently at the community planning level to the Greater Vancouver region in China and in Hawaii. Chang has received over 45 design awards, including the Order of Canada from the Governor-General Office of Canada, Canada's Governor-General's Medal in Architecture. His work has been published and exhibited in Canada, the United States, London, Germany, Japan, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Please join me in welcoming James Chang. So our format this evening is we're going to have each of the panelists speak for a maximum of 5 minutes, and they're going to tell us a little bit about either a project or a collection of projects, and how public participation made that project better, and some of the lessons learned. Then after we hear from each of the panelists, we're going to open it up to a group discussion, and it will be a facilitated discussion where I'll pose some questions, and also you can also join in the conversation as well. So to begin with, I'm going to start over here at my far right, and please take it away.
Okay, good. Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for having us. What a great opportunity to share with you guys what we've been up to and what we've been thinking about, what I've been thinking about. I'll try to be 5 minutes only.
Yeah. You'll have some time to Q&A too.
So 10 years ago, I started working with primarily post-secondary institutions and institutional work. A career shift for me as an architect, and I spent a lot of time in those first 5 years working on buildings and design and thinking to myself, wow, this is great, I've made it. I'm working on the building types I love. Funding has decreased in our province, and we're now at the start of a new 5-year capital plan cycle for post-secondary institutions. But what have I been doing the last 5 years out of that 10-year span? Well, actually, I haven't been doing as many buildings as I would like, and it's forced me personally in my career to actually start to do other things. And that's actually become a salesman and raise money for post-secondary institutions. You can call it feasibility, you can call it business case, you can call it what you want, but it's a non-traditional role that they don't teach you in architecture school. They don't teach you about public engagement in architecture school. They don't talk to you in architecture school about how to really understand what your client's needs are. And I think the last 5 years has been a great experience for myself and our education team to do that. We've been doing a lot of master planning work, a lot of work with user groups, as many as 100 groups from a faculty, from any particular institution. And I think some of the lessons we've learned, I mean, everybody knows about boards and rooms and town halls and sticky dots and post-it notes, and everybody knows about that. But I think some of the tips and tricks that we've been learning over the years is actually what really gets people engaged, and how do you interact with groups and individuals within those groups, whether it be faculty, staff, students, stakeholders. And I think what I've come to learn is kind of what they teach you. And if you're a teacher and you're in teacher's training, one of the first things that you learn are there's different styles of learners. And the way people learn, in the top category of learning are both visual learners and tactile learners. And then you have auditory, and you kind of go down, and it's kind of due to our physical nature as human beings. And so a lot of the public engagement work we do, either in master planning work or in building design or in programming, is actually a very tactile approach. And we do a lot of gaming, and there's lots of different ways that we do that. And I always say when I start working with a group, is that you get to now be the architects, or you get to be the planners or the designers. And the feeling that the group I'm working with, I can just feel it in the room. I can feel it suddenly. I get to say what I want to say, but it's not just a verbal. These are the pieces I get to play with. Here's the Monopoly board of where the transportation hub should go. Or here's the scale of something that I think would suit the campus. Or here's all the program pieces of the building, and I throw them on the table, and people immediately start to figure it out. It's almost like you get to be in kindergarten again and start having fun. So I found that tactile and giving people a chance to actually participate in a way that's physical has really been a good tool in a way that our group really likes to engage with different individuals and groups. And we usually get to the specific issues and problems very quickly due to that, because people put everything aside, very much like the exercise we did when we all got up in the room. I felt like I could start talking to people right away, because suddenly it was a physical activity, and suddenly we were all just people in the room, and we could start bringing down our barriers. So that's kind of the lesson learned, actually, is that sort of engagement through tactility is a really good way to do it, and allowing the users and the stakeholders to actually own that. So some stories. I think I'm probably at my end of my 5 minutes, and I'll leave it with the word tactile. How's that?
Maybe we can hear from James then.
Okay. Thank you. Next to Stanley, I'm probably the oldest person in this room. So some of my story goes back a little further, maybe even before some of you were born. I think the design world changed a lot in the late 60s with the hippie movement, with the whole earth movement, with public participation. Some of you may know of the times where students march on the freeway to demonstrate and stuff. And because of that, public participation become mainstream. Before that, there was no vehicle for people to actually get together to talk about issues and things. So as a result of that, I think the design profession, there's a firm in the United States called the CRS, started the charrette. What they would do is, let's say they get a hospital in Dallas, let's say, they would bring a team of designers to Dallas, and they would set up shop and do a charrette, and they do a 3D gaming, as you mentioned, so the users and everybody can participate. But because of the public involvement, it branches beyond just the hospital people. Then every stakeholder start to participate. And most architects, as the gentleman has said, we're not equipped to deal with that. And besides that, we tend to be the focal point because we are the proponent of the project. So what we started to learn about Stanley's group and so on is to have an independent group come in to conduct the charrette and do the gaming and do the visioning. So we let the public tell us what they want to see, how they want to participate. So that way it takes away the confrontation. So now move forward with cultural groups, whether it's the Native Indians or when you work in Hawaii, it's the descendants. They are very sensitive about their culture, their environment, and everything. So how do we engage them? And one of the, other than, and you can't go visit everybody on a one-to-one basis, right? So to have this kind of workshop, invite them over to participate, opens a lot of doors. And we do this before we start any design work. And the last one we did with Stanley was in Port Moody, and we actually have 3 open houses. And each time over 200 people attended. So we have a total of 718 people coming. And I think as the sequence went on, people heard about it and more people wanted to show up to participate. So I think that was a fantastic process. We're now taking the result, going back to the city, going to other groups and explain what happened, and this is what the people would like to hear. And that also formed another set of guidelines for designers to take forward to the project. So we have our own research, our own thing, but to hear from the public is also very good. And it gives us different perspectives. And it also gives us a tool to go in front of the politicians to say, look, here's 718 people. These are the ideas they would like to see. It's very strong, very powerful. And because we as architects are not the front person, Stanley's group were taking all the ones of the input, it gives the public actually a much more comfortable feel because they're not vested in the project. They were there as neutral people. They're just expressing their ideas. So I think having that intermediate step is really helpful.
Great, thank you. So we'll turn it over to Paul and hear from you.
Okay, well, I'm really at the other end of the spectrum because there's no real creativity in the work I do. I'm a design engineer, and we supply water and sewer to the Lower Mainland. So to get an idea of the scale of the projects we do, we're doing a twinning project in Surrey right now, where we're putting a new pipe next to an old pipe. We did some promo photos with a car inside the pipe. So if you can think of how big these pipes are, and we have to go into this quiet little residential neighborhood, dig up their streets, install these pipes. We don't have a lot of choice in where we can do. There's nothing the public can comment on. So our public engagement is more finding out what their issues are during construction, after construction, and try to bring some peace to them for that. So what we found is, like your charrettes, workshops tend to be the best. If you've got a talking head with someone at the front, people start jeering and threatening to call their lawyers and stuff like that. So sitting down, small groups, plans, drawings, the tactile stuff, let everybody look and understand the engineering constraints we face, then we find that we can work with them. And for us, the process doesn't stop once the design has been approved. Because the construction has such large impacts to the community, we often have working groups through the whole construction process, so that every 2 weeks we've got the contractor in, we've got the designers in, we've got the community in, and we go over the problems that have come up, look at ways of reducing things. You know, we've had a funeral once where we shut down and gave everyone a long weekend so they could have a funeral in the house. So we try to be responsive. So some of the lessons I think that I've learned is get out early. I think that's the key thing, because you know, I don't know whether it's arrogance on some people's parts or lack of education, but you know, oh, we have to do this, we'll just go ahead and do it. And then you get everybody up in arms after construction has started, and that actually costs you a lot of money because it slows down the contractor and you have to potentially redo stuff. So get out when you can control the situation and do that consultation up early. The other thing is there's always one in a crowd, right? And so we always have the one squeaky wheels. No matter what you do, you still have to work with them continually through the project. And don't ignore the squeaky wheel, because they can gather momentum. So I think it's always good, you know, to be polite, be honest with them, keep the project moving, but try to address their needs as best as you can.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to come on this side. So, and at this point, we're going to go to having it a conversation with everyone. So, as you listened, I'm just going to stand here and kind of rove around. So, as you, and I apologize to anyone I have my back to, as you listen to the panel discussion, what stood out for you? Are there any particular questions of clarity or questions or comments you'd like to make to the panel? Anyone? Share an experience? Oh, I've got a couple, so I'm going to come over this way. Here, just speak into here. That way everybody can hear it.
I thought it was very interesting that you were talking about how people are expecting that this consultation should occur. And I found it very interesting. There was a columnist or editorial or somebody writing in one of the papers saying, what is this social license that people are talking about? We have legislation that says that people can proceed and companies can proceed, and social license does not exist. And so if the legislation says these companies can proceed, they can proceed. So I think it's quite interesting that we have such a shift. And again, the legislation is always chasing to keep up with public opinion. And so when you have people saying, well, you know, this is not required, and then other people saying, well, excuse me, yes, it is. So I think it's important for us to kind of be on the front of the curve rather than being in the past. So.
Okay, great, thank you. And I saw another question or comment over here. I'm just doing this so that others can hear.
So I went to a sustainability conference in Kelowna, and I think they had well over 600 delegates. And this one person did a presentation where there were Lego pieces. We walked in, there were Lego pieces on the table, and I thought, what's this about? And then we had to build a sustainable city. They gave us 4 criteria for this. We had to have a recreational area, whatever they were. There were 4 areas. And you started touching those pieces, and it's if you didn't know what to do with them. But it wasn't within, I think, 5 or 10 minutes, everyone was very engaged, able to visualize, and I couldn't believe what was produced on the table. We built sustainable cities in, I think, an hour. So yes, it's even though I'm not necessarily a Lego person, but boy, I was right in there building pieces.
Sorry, what did you say?
I said you can use sugar cubes.
Oh,
to
sugar
do the same
cubes.
instead of Lego pieces.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting idea. So in terms of, people eat them. So in terms of, is there anything that intrigued you or you thought, well, that's an exciting idea that I heard? Anybody has a comment on or thought of a project that maybe they've been working on that they saw a parallel between what they heard? Oh, I'll come over here then. This doesn't reach a long way, but I just want to capture you. You might have to come a little closer. Okay, that's
If this works, I think it doesn't work.
well,
Can't you give me the same way as if I talk into that?
Well, this is for the people that aren't in the room. We're actually recording it so that people all over the province can hear what people have to say on this topic. So
Oh, I
it's not
see.
a broadcast mic, it's a recording mic.
I understand. Okay, then. So, yeah, it was very interesting to hear that you, James Chang, who is from so long, you put so much down on the table and you are having good projects, that you are so having a good experience with the public consultation. And on the other hand, I am having a little bit I'm a little bit skeptical of the public consultation. Like, for example, now in these days, I am doing a few projects in the city of Vancouver, and I am detached from a possibility somehow to get into the consultation process, even with the city planners, what exactly this public consultation was. That they say that they know. And then I am questioning, is it really that's what the public wants? I am not quite sure, because it's not quite normal sometimes, what I am asked to do. And I feel really bad, because I would like myself, when I do a project, to have some connection with those people. And I don't quite understand why, in this block, some people want these things, but in the next block, people want another things. And that's what's happening in this whole entire city, that truly what I experience is that the sun rises in Beatty Street, from the west, and then, from the east. This is about so different sometimes, that what we have to provide when we do some projects.
Well, let's, James, comment. Maybe you'd like to comment on that. I'll just come over this way. Thanks.
I think the public consultation process are flawed at best, but it is the best process we've got. You got to understand that every interest group have their own agenda. So let's say we have 100 people come out. Well, for example, Little Mountain, we did a consultation process on Little Mountain. It's a very sensitive, very controversial project. We have neighbors that come out screaming and yelling and everything, okay? Now, later, as we get to meet them and calm them down and talk to them, there are actually many different groups. We have groups that's out there to promote social housing. We have groups that are out there that just wants to complain about cost of living is too high. We have people that wants to have more recreation facilities. We have people that wants library. We have people who want jobs. We have people who want everything. So when we do a public consultation process, we have to understand that, first of all, people come with different agendas, and you have to listen to them, and you have to understand where they come from. The other thing is, we can't please everybody. There is no way all of us engage in any design process. There will be groups that we cannot please. And that's just part of it. And we like to be upfront. What we find that being respectful and being honest and straightforward, and don't build false expectations. We just say, this is all we can do. And I think people generally can understand that and respect that. And we also have to control the squeaky wheel or the domineering types. There are people who would just use that forum to dominate in a town hall situation to speak, and they won't let anybody else speak. And sometimes the group would yell them down and say, shut up, you don't represent me. But that, again, is public consultation. I think when we go in front of people, we have to expect that.
Thank you. So I'm curious, we'll hear from the panelists in terms of how you made the case internally, either within your organizations and or with clients, because often it's hard to make the case to actually, particularly if you have a diversity of clients, to make the case for public participation. And so how have you actually maybe made the case internally for engaging in more public participation if there are people who are resistant to it? And then how do you make the case with clients? I think people will be interested to hear a little, and we'll hear from each of the panelists on that.
Okay, so as a public organization, it's sort of part of our culture, public consultation. I think the discussion always happens to what level. And for us, it's impossible to guess what level you want until you've actually gone out. So we usually start with a public meeting and then gauge the level after that. So as Andrea alluded to earlier with Sapperton Pump Station, we had 6 people show up. So it wasn't a burning issue with the community. Other projects, you know, the place is packed to the ceiling and people are chanting and stuff like that. Then you've got to go to a more elaborate, you know, workshop and try to ferret out what are the concerns of the community and try to address those.
In our case, we find that if we're working in Canada, it's pretty much a mandatory process. I think public participation is normally just required. So we don't actually have to ask permission. But if you work in other parts of the world, like the United States or in Asia, some governments are very high-handed. They don't think they need to consult anybody until it blows up. I think our clients generally understands the value of public consultation, especially if they have been burned before. Like in Toronto, even though you got approval, somebody can still challenge you at the Ontario board, right, the municipal board, and they can sue you. In the United States, you send the lawyers. So if you have done your homework and you've done your public consultation, when you get in those situations, you're in a much better position to defend yourself and to defend your client. So if you explain that to the client, generally they understand. And the public consultation is a small amount of fees compared to the entire cost of the project. And one delay in several months will more than pay for the whole consultation process.
Thanks, James. I think for the post-secondary clients that I work with in British Columbia and Alberta, I think it is mandatory, and they know it is. What I find interesting amongst all the different institutions is they all deviate and have different opinions on when public consultation happens and what the purpose is. So I think what's important, it's not about deciding that you're going to do it. I think it's establishing what is the framework, why you're doing it, and knowing where on the sequence of events you are. And that affects your outcomes. And if any one of those isn't carefully considered amongst the project team, let's call it, then I think it can go off rails. And then things like the squeaky wheel, suddenly those will impact you in a negative way because you're not doing it within the framework that you've established. And I think it's also really important, I think it was brought up as one of the 4 key points, is transparency. And I think telling your audience and telling your stakeholders or who you're engaging with, knowing about where you're at in that process. What are the knowns, what are the unknowns, and what are you there to garner in terms of information or support or ideas? And I think that's critical in any kind of public engagement.
Thank you. So as you were listening to the speakers, I'm wondering, are you reminded of certain projects that you've worked on, things that you could think about in terms of how you might be able to bring some of these ideas into your own organizations? And I'm wondering if anybody wants to share any experiences from their own, or.
I just have a question.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely, please.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all really great examples, and it's good to hear that it's so prevalent in the work that you're doing. I was wondering if you could speak to an example. I'm always curious to hear if you can pinpoint or speak to an example where something changed on the project as a result of input from the public. That maybe made that project better or different from what you originally thought that it would be.
Great. And why don't Oh, you start? Okay, and then we'll hear from the other panelists.
What I like to suggest is that the way my firm always does it, we started with a blank piece of paper. We start with a blank piece of paper, so to speak. We do not want to go to a public consultation process with a scheme already hatched, because then you will be accused by people of being disingenuous, and then a lot of people will say, you already got your ideas all set. Why you bother to ask us questions? So we normally would do the homework to do the analysis. We present our analysis to the public to say, let's say there's an environment with beautiful forests and streams and stuff. We would hire an environmental consultant. We do the research to say these are the sensitive areas, these are so on. We will also talk about our methodology, like when we use Ian McCart's design with nature, we explain to the public. But we made it very clear to the public that we have not designed anything. The reason we're here is to listen. So that way, and the project will change because of what we hear, right? Because we haven't designed anything yet.
I think one example was on the Thompson Rivers University master plan that we completed 2 years ago. And I think Similar to what James is saying, at the front end of that kind of a master plan work, you do start with a blank slate, and often in the first introduction to a group, you realize who's missing. And in our case on that plan, it was actually a First Nations group, which is a huge part of that campus and culture in Kamloops. And we had to really quickly reshift our framework and rethink some of the retooling around how we did public engagement. And we ended up having First Nations engagement as a parallel streamline to our master plan work. So that was a real plus. The other thing is there's, again, what you don't know comes out of some of those early blank slate investigations. And an end result was we ended up with some research areas in the official community plan in the land use for that campus, which are now designated research lands and tie into some of the agriculture and kind of the land-based forms that they have on the campus. So it's the things that you don't expect, which I think are some of the happy outcomes and the happy accidents sometimes that just are a result.
So mine's a little more practical. On one of the public consultations, we found out that the community we were working in had a walking school bus for kids in elementary school. And so what we ended up...
Sorry, everybody didn't hear you there.
One of the communities we were working in had a walking school bus. I don't know, you guys know a walking school bus? No. One parent would start at the end of the block, start walking and pick up kids on their way to school, so they were supervised all the way to school. And so it came out in the public process that they didn't want the big trucks and heavy equipment rolling down the street while the kids were on their way to school. So we were able to work with the contractor and, schedule his deliveries of materials outside of the to school and back from school times. And the community was really appreciative of that.
That's a great example. Thank you. So as you were listening and you heard a number of examples, is there other questions or comments that you'd like to share from your experiences or maybe from your work that I'm just looking around the room? Anything, Stanley, anything you'd like to share? Okay. I could see you kind of looking.
Well,
you had this look like you was going to say something.
I think that if I boil it down to one or 2 points, people are experts in how they wish to live, and architects are experts in design. And it's better if you don't mix the two. Secondly, there is part of our process that I borrowed from Le Corbusier in a book called Concerning Town Planning, which he published in the 50s. And there he has a diagram of 24-hour cycle of the Earth, a helix. And on it he marks the various activities that go on during that time. And so in presenting to architects have picked this up and they are using it. And it's very simple. You just have a sheet of paper, you draw a helix on it, and you mark the times of a day. And you say, here's a day in the future. And you say that we're going to start at the end. After all the building and all the construction is done, what would a day look like? What would you do during that day? So then people call out what they would do in that day. Excuse me. And that focuses their attention on the life that they'd be living in this place, rather than trying to be architects or planners. Maybe the third thing is that, like Gunther Benisch and Lucien Kroll, we start with the details. And so it is the details that people meet. They walk the little walk, they experience the rain or the sunshine, they smell flowers or they smell pollution. And it's these details that people can identify with. Then they understand what your auditory design, what your lighting design, what your planting design. That comes next. And you know what to build because they have defined the criterion, the performance criterion for you.
That's a great transition to my last question, which is, You spoke a little bit at the beginning in your in your initial comments about lessons learned. If you had to share some additional lessons in terms of takeaways for people who maybe are new to the public participation field, and we have a lot of people who are sort of middle or newer to it, what would be some of the lessons learned that, from your experience, that you would share with people? And maybe I'll start over here and just start with one or two lessons learned, and I encourage people, if you have some lessons learned as well, you can ask everyone in the audience.
I think everybody's sort of stated that in the panel, but I'd like to reinforce it. Start early, right? The other thing is before you go into the process, know what is up for grabs and what is not. So in my profession, not a lot up for grabs, but we like to let people decide on certain things. So those would be the two takeaways I would offer.
Okay.
I fully support what was said, but I would like to add that be prepared. I think we got to do our homework before we go out to public consultation. I think it would be a big mistake to just say, I'm just going to go out there and listen to what people say, because invariably people will challenge you. And especially if you're dealing with local residents, they really know their neighborhood. So if you haven't even been to their neighborhood and you go out there, you can get really slammed.
I think on the institutional side with post-secondary clients, there's usually about 5 or 6 groups. You have your planners, facility directors is one group. You have students, you have faculty, you have staff, you have operations, maintenance, and then you've got some other ones in between. And then you've also got your cities and authorities. There's actually more than 5 or 6. I think the important thing is to be inclusive. All too often, when a client engages you and wants to do public engagement, they try to focus it in on a few groups that they know they can control and kind of steer the outcomes. And then you do that, and then 4 or 5 months down the road, then you introduce another group into the mix, and it's too late. You've got to be all-inclusive and transparent for success.
Great. Thank you. And I'll just look around the group, and I've got a question.
So a lot of our lives now is lived online and in the digital environment, and I'm wondering if and how you're starting to do more of your consultation work online to reach wider audiences.
So at Metro Vancouver, we've started using a lot of online forums. The other thing that we piloted at our Christmas team building thing, which I thought was the greatest thing since sliced bread, is being able to text in a comment and it flashes up on the screen. And so we tried that out, and it was a lot of fun. But you could see themes starting to develop as people started texting in things to the computer, and it was a fun way to engage people.
I find your comment very interesting because we find the opposite. We find people hide behind social media. They make negative comments without taking responsibility. Whereas if they are in a real group of people and people can see him or her, they have to be responsible for what they say. So quite often when we look at the blog or whatever we actually question whether some of these people are just having a bad day or they actually just want to let off steam. So we prefer face-to-face, real contact. We tend to discount what we get from our websites and stuff like that, because quite often they're just funny people wanting to make a comment.
I agree with James to a certain degree in that the dialogue is really important and critical, and I think that's your baseline. We use the internet and the web for posting and communicating and relaying information, which I think in today's age you just have to do. But it is that face-to-face, that dialogue, and that tactile activity where you actually come to resolve and you actually understand those ideas. So I think it is a personal thing. It's a human thing. It's tangible. It's tactile. Twitter feeds, we've used Twitter feeds, and we look at those and we assess how do they relate to the majority of the things we've heard in town halls and other kind of more personal communications. And often there's outliers, and sometimes there are, and we take it with a grain of salt, but we at least are opening it up to digital dialogue, but it isn't our mainstream of how we engage.
Any other questions or comments from the group? Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna pass this to you. You don't have to, just so that I can capture it.
I guess it was to want to raise points earlier. In my experience working in a big project in Alberta, our client was the government, and we had to meet with a lot of different stakeholders, and they were very insistent that we have a series of stakeholder meetings with one or two of a bunch of people in the room. So you'd have, say, agriculture and municipal stakeholders. And we really pushed for them actually to integrate that process, to have everyone in the room. And to our pleasure, that after it worked, we did it the first time around, they conceded that our way was probably a better way, because that integration is so important, and there's not as much merit when either the client or the consultants come and say, well, you know, the farmer said this and this said that. It's much better and much informed to have those discussions and for people to hear that directly in the table, in the room. I mean, this tool that we used was much more like a World Cafe, like a workshop setting. So we'd purposely mix the table so we wouldn't all sit together if we were all one group. And really, that just proves, I've seen it time and time again, work so well. And people really seem to appreciate that as opposed to breaking them all up. So.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Well, I want to take, oh, you do? Okay, perfect.
Just thinking about it.
Okay, thank you.
There are a couple of things which came to mind. One is, first of all, I found it quite interesting. There are architects and people who are involved with public consultation. We refer very much to the public as someone out there. It's actually sort of us as well. In public houses, I have come across architects' criticism, just as well as, Joe the plumber, and I think we need to understand us a little bit more as a larger group. That was one comment. Another one is, I think also the public, as it wishes more to be involved, there's almost a need to educate it before, or there is a need for us to educate the public before we involve. Very often this confrontation happens because we show up maybe too late, as has pointed out, with grand plans, and the question we pose, they're actually not able to answer, not because they don't want to or they're not willing to think about it. It's a short 3-hour meeting at night. They have to come up with answers to problems we have thought about for months. So before a public process is entered, a little bit of more, and education sounds arrogant, I don't mean it that way, it's just put information out there which can be comprehended, would be helpful. To the technology part of it, I would say this is very a generational problem. I think this is just a language thing. You have to serve all groups. Some people are more comfortable speaking public. I'm not that much. Other people are more comfortable tweeting or texting into a meeting. And I think this is for the non-cell phone generation to just grow up and deal with it. This will be a part of communication we just will do in the future. And thirdly, or fourthly, this is kind of a little bit through experience with public engagement projects I have done in the past in Vancouver. This is more about activating public space. We have found that the interest in the public in participating is very great, but when it actually comes to getting active in public space and being part of it, they become very careful. I will just very briefly describe one project to maybe make the point a little bit clearer. We constructed a karaoke kiosk, and this was really a kind of just a means of getting a wider group of the public involved in activity in a public space. So we put a little plywood box on the street with a touch screen. You could pick out of, I believe, 9 languages a karaoke song. song, and people were just asked to, you know, sing on the street. It was a couple years out on Granville Street, and it was very interesting how it was perceived. First of all, people thought we would do some sort of public questionnaire, and then they actually understood after a while that it's just for fun, and then it started to work quite nicely. To have public actually engage and really be part of a process takes very often, as was said before, you have to understand your audience, but you also really have to cater them and kind of tickle out a little bit their involvement rather than just presenting something. I'm not sure whether that all makes sense, but that was just the thoughts which went through my head.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So please join me in thanking our speakers, and I'm going to actually ask Drew to come forward and thank our speakers. And as we we encourage you to please stay and talk with your colleagues. We have lots of food, and join us for an additional networking and drink. And just want to say thank you. Please join me in thanking our speakers.